It was the most gruesome scene that I'd ever seen.
How did this girl go from what she started out as to become a murderer?
The death penalty says you can never prove to us that you would be different.
In a Texas jail cell, Karla Faye Tucker seemed to undergo a personal transformation.
Karla started getting a glow about her. It took me a while to believe that Karla had found the Lord.
What mostly hit me was his love, his love that just surrounded me.
I'd heard that story so many times I wanted to throw up.
If Karla Faye Tucker was not qualified to have a commutation, then there never will be one in Texas.
On the morning of June 14th, 1983, police were called to investigate a double murder at an apartment complex on the northwest side of Houston. Nothing could have prepared them for the appalling savagery they found in Jerry Dean's bedroom. Both the 27-year-old Dean and a 32-year-old married woman named Deborah Thornton had been bludgeoned and hacked to death. An axe protruded from the woman's chest and was embedded in her heart. That afternoon, police called Thornton's husband, Richard. They did not tell him his wife had been murdered.
Some detectives stopped by the house and asked me if I knew where my wife was. I said, we had a little tiff, so she wasn't here. I told them where she was staying and where she worked and that kind of thing. So they sort of left. I thought it was very strange.
At that point, Richard Thornton was a prime suspect. He would not learn the truth until the crime was reported that afternoon on the local news.
Sort of out of the corner of my eye, as they were panning the outside of the apartments, I thought I saw Debbie's truck. The plates were personalized plates, and they said Debbie, D-E-B-B-Y.
At first, police believed that Richard Thornton had murdered both his wife and Jerry Dean in a fit of rage over her apparent infidelity. Police eventually dropped Richard as a suspect for lack of evidence. Instead, they focused their investigation on victim Jerry Dean and who might have wanted to kill him. Dean ran with a rowdy group of friends. One acquaintance, a 24-year-old prostitute and drug addict named Karla Faye Tucker, readily admitted to police that she hated Dean. 2 years earlier, Dean had begun dating Tucker's roommate. Twice, Tucker had thrown Dean out of her apartment after his Harley-Davidson motorcycle dripped oil on the living room rug. Tucker also said Dean had defaced precious photographs of her and her mother. Police learned that Tucker had a boyfriend, a bartender named Dan Garrett. Coincidentally, the detective heading the investigation, J.C. Mosier, had known Danny Garrett when Garrett had worked at a fancy club in downtown Houston. Mosier had lost touch with him when Garrett began working at bars that catered to the biker crowd. The detective was surprised to hear that Danny was now with Karla Faye Tucker.
A wild child is the best way to describe Karla. And it just hit me like a ton of bricks that Danny Garrett would be hanging around people like this, a bunch of 19, 20-year-olds, and a bunch of dope fiends and prostitutes. And I couldn't believe it.
Karla Faye Tucker lived just a few miles from Jerry Dean's apartment. Danny Garrett and others from their crowd would hang out at Karla's place, drinking, shooting speed, and popping pills. Detective Mosier wanted to find out if his old friend Dan might have been involved somehow in the killing. He arranged for a woman who was a mutual friend to call Garrett's younger brother Doug. The mutual friend called the detective back in less than half an hour.
And she said, "J.C., Doug wants to talk to you right now. He's scared to death. He's crying on the phone. He said his Danny's involved in those killings." And I I mean, you got to be kidding me. You could have floored me right there.
It had been 5 weeks since the murders when the detective visited Doug Garrett's apartment to get his story. He found Doug in his living room with his girlfriend, Carrie, who just happened to be the older sister of Karla Faye Tucker.
So you had 2 brothers and 2 sisters. Very complicated thing here. And they began to tell me that the morning after the murder, Danny and Karla came to Doug's house driving Jerry Dean's stolen truck with some stolen items out of his apartment.
That morning, Carrie recalled, she had noticed something strange about her younger sister.
Something inside me, as close as we were, told me that she had done something very horrible, very horrendous. She had this look on her that I couldn't explain. The look of death is what it was.
In fact, Karla Faye Tucker and Dan Garrett soon began to brag that they had killed Dean the night before, along with a woman they didn't recognize. Tucker even claimed that she had enjoyed hacking the victims to death so much that she had experienced multiple orgasms during the murder. Over the next 5 weeks, Tucker and Garrett had begun saying they planned to murder a friend of theirs, Jimmy LeBrant, who had gone with them to Dean's apartment that night but hadn't participated in the killing.
Imagine that any human being could do this to another human being.
It was harder still for many people to fathom that one of the killers was a woman. Tucker was the first to go on trial for capital murder. Her court-appointed lawyer acknowledges he was at first disgusted by his client.
My first meeting with her, I did not enjoy what I was doing. She had the slurred, dull speech, the dead eyes, everything that you associate with heavy drug addiction. I just was repulsed by the whole idea.
Tucker's addictions included heroin, marijuana, and alcohol. In jail, she had no choice but to sober up. Slowly, her tough exterior began to crack.
She told me about the nightmares she had. She was going off drugs, so she was going through withdrawal.